Okay, the first speaker speaking today in the Tall Tales Contest, Mr. Snyder.
It's about time. It's about time.
Proceed.
You have all heard of the great lovers and couples of history, Romeo and Juliet, Cleopatra, Anthony and Cleopatra, peanut butter and jelly. But how many of you have heard those two great towers in Europe? This is their love story. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. It was the late 1850s, and the great clock tower, Big Ben, was gravely ill. They called in the clock doc. He performed a number of evaluations and then solemnly pronounced, Big Ben's time is almost over. This sent all Londoners into mourning for their great, great tower. They couldn't imagine life without Big Ben and his chimes. Tributes poured in from around the world. A great lyricist wrote words to Chopin's Polonaise. Till the end of time. That great novelist, Charles Dickens, paid homage to Big Ben in his masterpiece, A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And for Londoners, it was the worst of times. Big Ben's time would soon be up. Well, a couple nights later, Big Ben, with all the power he still had, let out a thunderous talk. Atmospheric conditions were just right. The wind was just right. People said they could hear and feel Big Ben's talk 1,000 miles away. Well, 761 miles in Pisa, Italy, another great tower, the Tower of Pisa, lay gravely ill, or stood gravely ill. But she heard and felt Big Ben's talk, and she perked up a little bit. She leaned as far over as she could to better hear. And she let out with all her might, chime! And Big Ben, 761 miles away, slightly leaned over. Well, those two tick-tocked and chimed all night. And in the morning, Londoners heard or woke to the sound of Big Ben tick-tocking and chiming. He was as strong as ever. Londoners danced in the streets and proclaimed a miracle. The great clock doc, who said it was just a matter of time, his ticker was going. Yes, they got me, called me on just in time. And meanwhile, 761 miles away, the Tower of Pisa was also doing well as ever, except she was leaning. She was inclining at a 5-degree rate. Well, they were amazed how well she was doing, but they called in the greatest engineers. We've got to build some buttress to help support the great tower so she doesn't topple over. Well, 160 years later, Big Ben and the leaning Tower of Pisa are as strong as ever, a true testament that their love has stood the test of time. And in the words of immortal Big Ben to his lover, dear lady, if I've got the time, I've got the time, if you've got the inclination. Mr. Toastmaster.
Dr. Michael Alexander.
Last month, I told you people about my trip to China. But there was an article in it that I didn't tell you about, and that was my trip on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Now, the Trans-Siberian Railroad isn't a railroad. It's a palace on wheels. It was wonderful. The finest china, the wine, heck, the water out of the coolers was something to die for. So I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. As the morning started, the train was getting ready. I saw them take a large box and put it onto the train, escorted by 4 armed guards. I looked at the signs on it and I asked my wife, who speaks Chinese, which I don't, what does the sign say? And she said, oh, very clearly it says nothing of importance and definitely not a Fabergé egg. Oh, I said, I wonder what it could be. But inspired, I ordered breakfast, specifically scrambled eggs. What else? As the train took off and I sat before the most magnificent of meals, the eggs with bacon, with again, a delightful wine, a wonderful aroma. And I realized the sound of sizzling bacon beside me wasn't bacon. It was the sound of motorcycles. I looked out the window, and there, riding up, coming to the train, were Mongols on motorcycles. Now, Mongols ride motorcycles when they can't get camels, and you understand camels are sometimes a little difficult to work with. But they rode up fast and hard, their rifles posed. Did you ever try to ride a motorcycle while holding a rifle? Something I recommend. And the kick of a rifle, if you were to fire it, is pretty bad. But I realized the train was about to be. So what does a man do when he realizes the train is about to be robbed? Well, the first thing you do is you finish the bacon, because nobody in their right mind is going to let bacon go to waste. And I grabbed and I downed my wine, and my wife said, don't do anything foolish, dear. I said, foolish? Me? Foolish? That's my middle name. I ran to the door to the car. I opened the door. I climbed up the ladder. I got on top of the train. And as I sat there, watching carefully, I suddenly felt a large thump. It was my wife hitting the roof. She was furious with me. But as the motorcycles came up, I could hear the shouts, the shots, and I looked, and there was a single Mongol holding up the box. The others were still on board. I jumped off of the top of the train onto the motorcycle. You know, my crotch hurt like hell when I did that. But it knocked off the Mongol who was there. And he fell. And I grabbed the motorcycle. Now, those of you who know me know I am a motorcyclist. And I'm a good one. So I moved as fast as I could, grabbing the motorcycle, ran off, zipping back and forth through the sands. Yeah, the sands of time is a story for a different contest. The Mongols came after me. I zipped. They tripped. They fell. I got ahead of them further and further. I got to where there was actually not sand, but actually hard road. And I rode and I rode and I rode till I got to the police station. And they looked at me and said, why are you carrying a box of Fabergé eggs? I said, I'm not. It says very clearly, not Fabergé eggs. They said, "You lie." At least I think that's what they said. They were speaking Chinese. Can't imagine why. So I wound up under arrest for stealing a motorcycle and stealing Fabergé eggs. I was a hero, but I was in jail. And all I can tell you is I think of my scrambled eggs, I'm never going to look at eggs the same way again. Mr. Toastmaster.